the reality is, and please, anyone listening, if you're going through this, believe me on this, you need to investigate your sources,
Mm.
because the internet is amazing because you can get so much information. But the other side is that there are a lot of people out there with a megaphone that have an agenda. They are hammers looking for nails,
Mm.
and there's a lot of stuff out there that comes from sources that, with PhDs, or they sound authoritative, and they've got some well done science, and they say it with such certainty that when you are in that place of vulnerability, it is very easy to get sucked in.
If you grew up in the church, have you ever doubted that what you were taught in Sunday school was actually true? As you grew older, did those doubts multiply and expand? And maybe you pushed them down because you just faked it till you made it. And then one day they all come bubbling out. Well, that is exactly what happened with my guest today, Devin Squeri. He was raised in the Catholic Church and he never really knew for sure if it was true. And as he got older and became interested in science, he began to question whether any of it was true at all. And then those doubts began to compound. And when he was on the verge of atheism, he decided that he wanted to seek truth because he realized that he had to figure out what was the meaning of life if it wasn't Christianity. So he joined a group where Christians and atheists met together. And that's where he met my friend, Alan Hainline. Alan is an apologist with a background in physics and intelligent design and the fine tuning argument. The two of them met, and ultimately, it's a beautiful and encouraging story of Alan discipling Devin into a true faith, resolving his doubts. And today, Devin's here to talk about his book called The Doubt Project, A Crisis of Faith, the Battles, and the Answers. Here's the description. I want to read this to you because it is so encouraging. I think it's really relevant to a lot of people who experience these kinds of doubts. When the foundation of belief in God collapses, what remains? In The Doubt Project, a raw and intimate journey unfolds, the personal story of years of suppressed questions, a catastrophic collapse of faith, and the courage to seek truth. Some of the questions Devin was asking: is the Bible made up? Is it science or God? Or the atheist right? Or what's the point of it all? And this conversation that I just had with Alan and Devin was so encouraging to me. I know it's going to be encouraging to you. Before we get to this great conversation, though, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Brave Books, a Christian children's entertainment company. You can get 20% off your purchase by going to bravebooks.com/childers. I want to encourage you also that if you're experiencing doubts, if you know someone who is experiencing doubts about Christianity, there's a wonderful website called talkaboutdoubts.com. So many of my friends are a part of this website where someone who's doubting can go on the website, submit a question, and then set up a one-on-one, face-to-face chat about these questions from people who have thought some of these questions through and might be able to give really good answers. So both Devin and Alan are a part of this, and here's what I love about their heart. As you'll hear as we go throughout this conversation that tells their story, they both are offering to walk with anybody who has doubts. So if you have these kinds of doubts, I want to encourage you to reach out. Go to talkaboutdoubts.com, reach out to Alan, reach out to Devin. We're going to link their information. We're going to link the ministry Talk About Doubts. We're going to link Devin's book in the notes here so you can check all of that out. And I just really hope that this conversation encourages you. Here's Alan and Devin. Well, I'm here with Alan Hainline and Devin Squeri. Now, Alan, you have been on the podcast, but it has been, I don't even know if you remember, because it has been so many years. This is back before I even had a video podcast. We talked about intelligent design because that is really the area of apologetics that you excel so well in. But for anyone who's unfamiliar with you, and then we're going to get to Devin as well, but I just want you to introduce yourself to my audience. What do you do? And kind of set the scene for this story that we're going to tell today. And I think it's a very encouraging story, and I'm very excited for everybody to hear it.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Alisa. Yeah, I currently work as a small business owner, working in software, working a lot with commercial satellite imaging, 3D apps, and I do a lot of apologetics on the side, sort of a tent maker. Have a group out at UT Dallas, Reasonable Faith, that you've graciously spoken at before, and yeah, I've kind of been at it for a while now, but do you want me to go into my own story of doubting?
I'd love to hear what got you into apologetics, and then even as an apologist, Are there times when you encounter doubts, or have you encountered doubts? Because we're going to be talking about that a lot today. Just what do we do with doubts? How do we diagnose doubts? What do we mean when we're talking about doubt?
Yeah, that's an important area to talk about. I think that the church needs to do better at helping people that doubt. My own story was I had some really close friends in college. We were really, bold in trying to be evangelists in college and, sort of just trying to live for Christ. And some of those people that I really looked up to as leaders came to me later, a few, decade and a half later after college and said, I don't even believe anymore in God. And I think it was just an emotional experience. And it really kind of hit me at a dry time where I'd been working too much, not in the word as much as I should be. And it just caused me to have some doubts that really raised a lot of important questions. Like, how do I know for sure what truth is? How do I know for sure Christianity is true? So I had some pretty severe doubts, kind of up and down, back and forth. I didn't really share it very openly with people. I didn't feel like I knew anybody to go to give me answers. And at that time, it was a little bit harder than it is now, but I was able to get some resources, some books, get some help. And I realized that a lot of the main objections I was hearing, I have a science background, and it always was around a lot of smart atheists that made bold claims against God. And when I looked into those, though, I found that even in my own field of physics, or at least the background I had in college, I do more software engineering now, but I realized that there's a lot of really powerful evidence for God from physics. And that's what we talked about years ago on the podcast with you. I'm especially impressed with the fine-tuning argument, but I think also the origin of the universe, things like that are good evidence. So anyway, I did have the opportunity to write a chapter in a book with Luke Barnes, he's the real expert on fine-tuning. I'm just someone that tries to help popularize what the true scholars are doing. He does research, writes a lot of papers on it. And anyway, it was a really great opportunity to write. It was just a chapter, but in a book called Story of the Cosmos, we wrote about fine tuning and tried to make the argument that it points to God. And I was speaking about that at a atheist Christian book club, which is a cool concept.
That is.
There's a group out in our area that meets. And Devin had found out about that. We'll let him tell his side of the story in a little bit. But I was speaking there about our chapter and engaging with a number of skeptics and so forth, presenting the evidence. And so we had a lot of fun with that. And that's where I met him. And we kind of hit it off and really enjoyed talking with him. It became obvious that he was trying to get answers and he was in a similar place to where I had been, years back. So I definitely wanted to try to meet with him and talk with him in any way I could possibly help.
Very cool. We're going to go to Devin in just a moment for your story, Devin. But before we get off what you were just talking about, Alan, you mentioned about fine tuning. Now, in my podcast, it's been a long time since we've talked about it, probably since we talked with you last about it. So for anybody that just is like, I have no idea what you're talking about, what is this fine tuning thing? How would you articulate the argument for God's existence from fine tuning in just a really kind of 30,000 foot way, just a really simple way for people to get their hands around what you're even talking about?
Sure. So it deals with there's different versions of fine tuning, but the one I like to defend is not so much focusing on the environmental aspects, which I think are also significant, but more at the most fundamental level. You want to look at the laws of nature and ask the question, do they look like there's anything special about them? And what we found from modern physics, is that tiny changes to the laws of nature, such as the strength of the different forces like gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, those would have a profoundly disruptive impact on the ability to have life anywhere in the universe. And that there's other parameters as well that are necessary even for just structure formation. So if you want to have any kind of complexity, if you want to build anything at all, much less life, the properties of the universe are very rare among possible values for these constants governing the laws of nature. And so I find that really does look like there's a fine tuner. It doesn't seem like the thing that could happen by chance. as really all physicists acknowledge that it's a very narrow, tiny, tiny sliver, razor's edge kind of range where you could have life permitting constants among a vast set of possible values for the constant. And it's not infinite either, which helps avoid some more complicated problems.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's sort of what it boils down to.
Very good. All right,
Hey,
Devin. Yeah, please, Devin, pop
one of
in.
the thought there. When Alan says that it's a non-life permitting universe, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be humans, right? Or there'd be like squid people or something like that. That people very often try to dismiss this by imagining, the silicon guys from Star Trek, if you're old enough to remember that stuff. What we're talking about is that if any one of these constants is off by outside the threshold, and the thresholds we're talking about are, if you remember your exponents from high school, like the smallest ones are like 1 in 10 to the 37. So what that means is a 1 with 37 zeros. So just imagine how tiny that is. A million, right? A million is 1,000 is 3 zeros. A million is 6 zeros. So that we're talking about the 37, and that's one of the smaller ones. And if any of these are outside of that window, then things like the universe would have collapsed upon itself. That the atoms would have been so diffuse as so that they couldn't come together and make molecules. So, like, life permitting means it's impossible to have life. And I just want to say that because a lot of people kind of try to dismiss this by saying, oh yeah, not life as we know it. You hear that all the time, not life as we know it. It's like, no, not just life as we know it, physically impossible to have any form of life that you could even possibly imagine.
Mm.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in on
No, that's good. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I was listening to a Jordan Peterson podcast a while back, and I heard him say that he does not find the fine tuning argument, or I don't know if he worded it like that, but intelligent design, that sort of thing. But I'm pretty sure he was talking about fine tuning, that he didn't find it persuasive, which kind of surprised me because I would have
Hmm.
thought, it would kind of expected better. Are you aware of that, either of you? Or
I haven't studied him on that one since that's not his main area, I guess.
yeah, yeah, okay. Well,
well,
I
and
wondered if
then
you knew.
and then intelligent design, he'd probably be speaking of, more of along the lines of humans than necessarily the physical constants that define our reality. So I don't know. I haven't heard him speak on that, so I really can't
But you're
can't
saying even
comment
the
too much.
physics fine tuning, he's not persuaded by.
Well, that was, I'm not a science person, so I could have misunderstood, but I thought that's what he was saying. I just thought if
Yeah.
maybe you knew about it, but that's cool. So, Devin, tell us your story because you came to, okay, that I didn't realize that you guys met at one of these atheist Christian kind of meetup things. Like, why were you an atheist at the time, and why would you go to something like that?
Um, so so the story is, it was August before my 50th birthday, and as it was rapidly approaching, just a couple months, I started, as I was hitting very easily the back nine, but probably the last third of my life. I started thinking and wrestling with the ideas of my own mortality. What was going to happen to me when I died, and I realized that I didn't have any answer that I truly believed. Now, I was raised in a Catholic household in New York, but we were what I call C&E Christians. Basically, we went to church on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. But I did go to Sunday school, which of course was on Wednesday, so aptly named. But I went through all that, all the way up, did the sacraments. I even got my Boy Scout medal for Catholicism at Altare Day. I taught Sunday school when I was a senior in high school. So I sort of felt like I was checking all the boxes of all the stuff that I needed to do. But the reality is that I had a lot of questions that were never, I won't even say answered, because they were never even addressed. So I felt like everybody else had this all under control. Everybody else believed everything that they needed to. And so I was the outlier and I really shouldn't make any waves. And I would just stick it under the covers and go on with my day. Well, I have as I'm sure we all bump into things that we don't necessarily jump on, and my list really started to grow. I also have a science background, although I freely admit I did more time in the bar than the library in college, so I will never profess to be an expert as Alan is. Um, but I did have exposure to a lot of science. But honestly, it wasn't even like collegiate level science and indoctrination at university. It was just regular school where you learn all of these things. And honestly, I bought into the idea of scientism, where science is the way to gain knowledge. It offers all of our answers, and when you start looking at things, if you're in that mindset and you're subscribing to that worldview, then when you encounter something like Darwinian evolution, well, you have a choice, right? You have a choice of believing in Genesis, or you have a choice of believing in science. And while it was never overtly stated, the um, the feeling that I always had was that science was for the people who were intelligent and forward thinking and rational, and things like Genesis were nice stories to make you feel good, but it wasn't something that you really should put that much stock in. And I went on like that, feeling like, honestly, I kind of felt like I would be a good member of the flock and do what I had to do, as long as I didn't look under the covers too much, because the back of my mind, I knew that there really couldn't be any truly satisfying answers. The stories were great, all that, and it was great as a social construct, but it was never going to actually hold water if I really put it under the light of day.
How awesome would it be for us as Christian parents to have a resource to help our kids understand things like worldview, the framework by which we make sense of reality, to teach them about truth and about God, science versus faith, critical thinking? Well, look no further than Foundation Worldview Curriculum. This is my number one recommendation for homeschools, for Sunday schools, because we have a big problem that in our culture, even the youngest of our kids are presented with so many competing truth claims every single week. And Foundation Worldview's biblical worldview curriculum really helps solve this problem by laying the foundation for how to seek truth in all aspects of life. So throughout this curriculum, we're going to explore with our kids questions like, what is truth? Who is God? How did life begin? What does it mean to be human? How can I tell right from wrong? And this can be easily adapted for your Christian homeschool or your Christian school or your Sunday school. So this is designed for really intentional parents and church leaders who want to take a proactive approach to avoid the future pain point that we're talking about on the show today. So go to foundationworldview.com, use the code Alisa for 10% off of any family, church, or Christian school license. Again, foundationworldview.com, use my code Alisa. Okay, this is
Um,
really interesting. I want to explore this just a little bit because you mentioned a word, scientism, and I'd love for you to define that for our audience, because what's kind of crystallizing for me as you tell your story is that I think what you're articulating is something a lot of people who grow up in the church might feel, where it's like you might have this little doubt pop up about something somebody said in Sunday school, or maybe something you read in the Bible, but you push it down. You just think, oh, I'll just kind of go along with it, or fake it till you make it type of thing. And then for a lot of people, though, a lot of those doubts just end up kind of growing and multiplying and then bubbling over. And then you have somebody just completely walk away from the faith, or just, like you said, just kind of go along, realize maybe it's good for the world, it's a good social construct, but it's not probably true. But I think as you're talking, I'm seeing that worldview is just so important, because a lot of times people aren't really thinking through what their worldview is. And of course, worldview being the framework by which we make sense of reality. And everybody has a worldview. Everybody, even atheists, there's, in fact, Natasha Crane in her book, Faithfully Different, really pointed out that even secularism is a worldview. There's no such thing as a neutral worldview. That's just where everything's an even playing field. Every worldview is operating from a particular framework. So can you talk a little bit about scientism and maybe the impact that has on a lot of people who might be adopting it uncritically and not realizing that that has actually become the framework by which they're making sense of reality?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Everyone does have a worldview because we all look through a lens, right? So that's a worldview, is you're looking through a lens, how you interpret outside stimuli, things that happen in your life or in the world. Um, so scientism is really the belief that the way to knowledge is purely through science, and it overrides and overrules anything else. Alan, would you agree with that definition? You want to add to it?
Yeah, it's all about the way that you acquire knowledge. It's an assumption that you could explain everything through just natural processes. And what's interesting to me is that people to Elisa's point, they lose sight of the fact that a lot of times they'll make a worldview assumption that naturalism is true, that nature is all there is. And then that affects their epistemology, how they gain knowledge. And they assume then that I can only gain knowledge by studying the natural world. They never look at philosophical arguments or evidence from changed lives, things like that, which we believe also provides evidence for Christianity. But I found even within science, we've got, I think, pretty good evidence from science itself that points to God if someone is open-minded enough to admit the possibility of the supernatural.
I want to
Well,
read a quote. I want to read a quote real
well,
quick and then I'll come back to you, Devin, that kind of illustrates what you guys are talking about. So, this is from Richard Lewontin, who is a biologist. And this is a bit of a lengthy quote, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but my audience may not be, where he actually really admitted that scientists basically kind of have to choose because it requires philosophy to actually analyze the evidence that you're gathering in science and make assumptions and make arguments and hypotheses and analyzing that stuff to come to conclusions. And so here's what Lewontin said. He said, our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism, which is a very close cousin to the naturalism view that you just articulated, Alan. And he goes on, it is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. And so he's basically realizing that you kind of have to choose. In fact, this is one of the quotes that Catholic philosopher Ed Feser used in his book, Refuting the New Atheism, a while back, to illustrate that this materialism or naturalism, scientism, to all closely related concepts, are actually more religious in nature than people even realize.
if you
Yeah, it's a
look back,
rare candid admission there. Sorry, Devin.
yeah,
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
yeah, no worries. If you look back at the history of science, which by the way, the modern science was basically created by the Catholic Church, or at least a method of pursuing science. And a lot of the major discoveries over the last hundreds of years. But I do want to take a quick step back because there's something I did want to jump back to. I kind of cut myself off before. I want to make it clear that I absolutely do not blame the Catholic Church at all for me not having the answers, because the reality is that growing up a teenager, I was easily more interested in doing other things than learning theology. I will say that I think the big miss there was letting people know, as they were having this tentative relationship with the church, that We get it. You're not getting in deep right now, but just keep in mind that the answers are there when you get to the point that you need to reach out and find those answers. So, I think the initial part of the way I was going, it might have sounded like I was blaming the church. And I want to be very clear. I have absolutely not, because I don't think it's unique to my experience, like you were saying. I think it's all over the place, and it's completely unspoken that people, when they encounter these doubts, they just put them under. And you brought up a very, very important point on that. People repress this, and then it goes on for a while and spurs different types of doubts. So and then it leads to catastrophic things, either people quietly falling away or having like a crisis of faith like I did. So, when I was going through this, um, I learned that there's three types of doubt. There's intellectual doubt, there's emotional doubt, and there's volitional doubt. And I'm not going to get too far into all of them, but intellectual doubt is pretty straightforward. It's not necessarily trivial, but it's straightforward. It's you have questions about something, right? Like, how on earth could, or one of the ones I had, just a silly thing, was that, how do we know that Jesus didn't bring extra wine or have it out in his ox cart and just bring it in after, and the story, evolved into this whole
Yeah, like a trick, like
mythological
did a trick. Yeah.
story. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Because I mean, when I was dating, I admit that I would keep a couple bottles of wine in a bag in my car. So if things were going great, I'd have some wine to bring in. I was like, well, why couldn't that have happened? Something like that. So that's intellectual doubt, but the big thing is that when that intellectual doubt is not addressed and it goes on for a period of time, it kind of grows some extra fangs and horns and turns into emotional doubt, where that suddenly has a fear component, typically fear. At least for me, it was driven really out of the fear of dying and disappearing. Like I I absolutely was mortified at the idea of just kind of, I'm in computer science, of being kind of deleted, just gone. And my family too, my kids, my parents, my wife, all of that. So, like, that was so horrible to me. It made it so hard to actually commit to believing, because I was terrified that this, if it was true. So, and by the way, Gary Habermas, a shout out to him. He's got some great stuff on doubt and the three types of doubt. And the third, just to close the loop, is volitional. Um, we can talk about a little bit more about that later, but in brief, it's just when you kind of physically, you just choose not to believe for whatever reason. That can be from a variety of things.
Yeah, that's a very helpful way to articulate the three kinds of doubt, because as I've reflected on the types of doubt that I've experienced, the main doubt, I think we've all experienced maybe a mixture of some of that stuff, but the main one for me was intellectual. And I've told people, and they kind of look at me in a surprised way, but when I say, I don't think all doubt is intellectual, I think sometimes people frame doubt as being intellectual, but really it's more in the volitional category, because maybe it has to do with struggling with some of the passages you see in the Bible, and how could a good God do such and such, or how could a good God send people to hell? Those are the types of questions that aren't really in the intellectual category, because you're not really asking just an intellectual question about, like, well, how do we know the Bible hasn't been corrupted? Or, like you said, how do we know Jesus didn't have some bottles of wine in the cart and snuck it in there and did a trick? That sort of thing. And so for me, I think my intellectual doubt was resolved fairly quickly. It took a long time to get through all the intellectual doubts that I had been faced with, but I was able to resolve them fairly quickly, because I actually did find the gospel beautiful. I wasn't looking at the Bible and thinking, oh gosh, how could God do this or that? In fact, those thoughts were planted by a skeptic that was kind of constantly throwing those types of claims at me. So that's a very helpful way to put it. So Devin, when you were going through maybe some of your doubts, you decide to go to this meeting. What do you think was the main type of doubt that you were experiencing? And maybe give us a specific example of, like you did with Jesus and the ox cart, but were there other things, especially coming from a science background, like as you were evaluating maybe the claims of Darwinian evolution or something along those lines? As America turns 250 this year, I want to take a moment to remember the people who helped build it. And I'm not talking about the ones in the history books, but the ones who woke up before the sun season after season without seeking any sort of applause. And of course, I'm talking about America's ranchers. And this is one of the reasons I love Good Ranchers. It's American, born, raised, and harvested, better than organic chicken, grass-fed beef, wild caught seafood, heritage breed pork. I love Good Ranchers. It makes everything super easy. In fact, just today, as a part of homeschool, we were learning about the kind of bread they ate in the Bible that was made with barley. So guess what we did? We made some barley bread. You know what we're going to have with our barley bread? We're going to have some beautiful Good Rancher steaks that I thawed out just today. And this makes thinking about dinner, planning dinner so much easy. Plus, it's so healthy for my family. So check them out today if you've never tried them. Today is a great day to start because you're going to save up to $500 a year by going to goodranchers.com today. If you use my code Alisa, you're going to get an additional $25 off your first order. Again, that's goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa.
It was basically 40 years of repressed questions,
Mm,
and it created that when it finally popped, it was like an absolute avalanche to the point that I feel like the entire underpinning of my life just completely dissolved, and um, I was uh, I was kind of in a state of panic, and it happened. Well, the weird thing is, it happened super super fast, like almost overnight. And um, I'll just share like this one memory I have that it still feels like it happened yesterday. I was in my closet and I was changing my clothes. In the middle of it, I started contemplating um, atheism, and for me, I equate atheism and materialism. I won't bother getting into that too much, but really getting into atheism, and if that was true, because at this point, I felt like when I really, if I really, I was afraid to look at, I was afraid to really face the questions that I had regarding Christianity and if God existed at all, because I felt like it was going to come back wanting. I just remember my upbringing in in the church. Every answer was because God loves you. Um, and while that is true, it doesn't give me great faith as to why we should really believe any of this. I never really heard any answers why we should believe. Just you should believe. And you get, it's like, why do we know the Bible's true? Well, because the Bible said so. Well,
right.
that when you get to
Good
that
point.
point and you're really being honest and you're facing that and you're really asking the questions, that doesn't hold any water. If you're questioning the authority of the Bible has no power. So I was in my closet and I started really contemplating uh, atheism, and where I was really pretty certain I was ending up. Um, Boy, it still gives me chills just thinking about it. Uh, I started really going and thinking about what that meant, what that would mean for everything, and just the nihilism of it all, how nothing matters because in a very few short years, we're all going to be dead. We're just a bunch of, molecular machines moving around. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter what you do, no matter how good, no matter how bad. Um, and there is no good and bad, right? Uh, so, you know, I just was like, I got to the point, I was like, well, what is the point? What is the point of any of it? And I remember I was sitting there thinking about it, and I felt like, and the only way I can describe it, I felt like I was looking uh, into like a black vortex, and it is the weirdest thing ever. I felt like I was getting pulled into it. Um, I felt like I was losing myself into this feeling of nihilism, and I feel like at the very last moment, I know this sounds kooky, but I I pulled myself away and just said, whatever the outcome, I am going to go and I'm going to ask these questions,
Wow.
and whatever the answers are, I'm going to just have to deal with it. And that actually launched a 2 year journey that we ended up documenting, where I basically, I've been self-employed since I was, in my early 20s, and had a lot of freedom, if you will. But I spent at least 60 to 80 hours a week for 2 years going through and asking all of the questions. Now, as to what specific question, it started with some of the big ones, like how do some of the big ones for me was, especially because of the science background, was, can you believe in the story of Genesis and believe in evolution? Are those two things mutually exclusive, or can you reconcile that? And then following on with that, can you believe most of the biblical stories? And is there anything supernatural? And what I found was that as I would go into one of these issues, I would suddenly get pulled off on rabbit trails into, 12 other issues. So suddenly, we'd be going in, has the Bible been changed over time? So, has it been mythified? Well, then that leads to the question of, well, hold on, wait a minute, because, and the worst part is, by the way, uh, as you're going through this and trying to get genuine information, or truthful information, and you're trusting that what's out there is being provided by other truth seekers, the reality is, and please, anyone listening, if you're going through this, believe me on this, you need to investigate your sources,
Mm.
because the internet is amazing because you can get so much information, but the other side is that there are a lot of people out there with a megaphone that have an agenda. They are hammers looking for nails,
Mm.
and there's a lot of stuff out there that comes from sources that, with PhDs, or they sound authoritative, and they've got some well done science, and they say it with such certainty that when you are in that place of vulnerability, it is very easy to get sucked in. So please take the time to investigate who you're listening to. I remember one time, well, and with that, there were nights I'd be on YouTube and going from video to video, and I'm in the middle of one video, and it's talking about something else. So I spawn the new video in a new window, and I swear I'd have 50 windows open of all the
Yeah.
different videos that I'm trying to watch at the same time, because you're in a panic. Well, if this is true, but wait, they just said that over there. Let me go check that. And wait, I gotta hop up. And then you turn around, and I remember it was like 3 in the morning, and I was going through, and suddenly there came up um, the claims that, Christianity, well, this was the silver bullet for Christianity. It's completely false, and we're going to prove it. Well, there was this guy who was born to a virgin and surrounded by shepherds, and raised people from the dead, and was named the truth and the light and the lamb, um, you know died for the people's sins, rose again, had 12 disciples, and we all know who that is, right? Of course, it's Mithras,
Right.
right? The Persian god that was around before Jesus by 500 years, and the Roman centurions brought the story back from modern day Iran and Iraq, and the Jews needing a god to fight against the Romans incorporated this and created their own mythology, and that's how Christianity was made. And that you can even look. I mean, Mithras was born, created on December 25th, and so is Jesus. They had the suppers together. And you look at all of these things, and you're like, if this is true, there's just zero
Right.
way that Christianity, that Jesus is not a made up. I mean, it's very clear. And I was sitting there, and my stomach was in my throat. I was
Mm.
in such a panic. Um,
Was that the
so I took a
Zeitgeist
minute.
movie you were seeing, Devin?
No, there's
Something
multiple sources,
similar.
not the Zeitgeist. It is in the
Yeah.
Zeitgeist movie.
Well, and I'll
Um,
tell you also
but
from just researching so much in the deconstruction movement on TikTok and all of these different sites, You're not exaggerating at all. There are so many, and I've been astonished to see the confidence with which some of these claims are made. Like, I remember back when I was in my faith crisis doing not a super deep dive, a medium dive on the other, those claims like Mithras and Osiris and some of the other ones where they're saying, oh, there's all these similarities. But when you put the TikTok videos aside and you actually go to the scholarship, it's like, it's so much of it is manipulated with language. Like for Mithras, for example, the idea is that he was sort of kind of born out of this rock. And then I think it's our friend Frank Turk says, well, yeah, if the rock was a virgin, you can call that a virgin birth. And that's the kind of
Exactly.
manipulation of language that's going on.
Not only that, they'll take something like and make these ridiculous extrapolations. The 12 disciples, by the way, that would be pretty compelling. Well, it's because they found a mosaic with Mithras surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
I am not kidding. That is their connection to him having the way Jesus did. And then the other side of it, the actual legitimate things that there are similarities, it's because the the Mithranites were borrowing Christians a couple hundred years after Jesus, like in I think 300 AD in Rome. So it wasn't even, and by the way, early apologists were complaining about uh, these folks borrowing their traditions and trying to copy on it to kind of you know you know ride on the coattails of the Christian movement. So anyway, the important thing is that there's all of this quote unquote scholarship out there, and for someone who's vulnerable, it is very easy to get pulled in and destroyed, and it's really hard to take a breath, take a beat, look at what you're reading, consider it, consider all the information you get, but go and compare it with other sources and find out what's truly believable. Don't just take something you hear and take it as pun intended gospel and go running like because you know spoiler alert. One thing I found for all the doubts that I had, that first of all, not none, but most of mine were really not original. They've been debated for hundreds or thousands of years, and just about all of them have very, very satisfying answers. If you can go and look.
That's great. Alan, I felt like you wanted to pop in with something on all that. Quick pause to tell you about Brave Books. I love Brave Books. They have collaborated with some of our friends, Frank Turek and Melissa Doherty, to create stories and shows that are not just safe, but they strengthen your child's faith and values. They also have a new streaming platform called Brave Plus, where you can give your kids carefully curated shows and stories that are going to avoid overstimulation, encourage positive behavior, and reinforce biblical truth, all while being fun and engaging. It's the kind of gift that keeps on giving because it shapes the hearts and minds of our kids, building a foundation on truth all year long. Right now, you can go to bravebooks.com/Childers to save 20% off your first purchase. Bravebooks.com/Childers. Check them out. Brave Books. It's awesome.
Yeah, just to mention a lot of the information about the copycat Jesus is just downright incorrect. And then a lot of it is their only references are people that didn't have primary references, and they'll treat that as though it's the same. You really have to go back to the original sources, and you
Yeah.
just don't have that. For example, for Mithras, as you
Right. There's not
mentioned,
that much scripture. They didn't really have much scripture, did they?
they didn't have much writing at all that predated Christ with respect to Mithras. So
Yeah.
it's really bogus to try to, the claims. You would look at non-Christian people that have studied this, and they've universally rejected it over 100 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
really crazy that it's making a resurgence only because of the internet and people not doing their due diligence homework.
Yes, for sure. So, Ellen, when you were at this meeting and you met Devin for the first time, I really want to talk to you from your side of things too, because one of the things that's so encouraging to me about your story is that, like Devin's mentioning, you're home alone, you're isolated, you've got all these videos going on. But then if you go actually talk to a real Christian, a real person, and you can have some back and forth, there can be some challenge, there can be some follow-up questions, some additional research that happens. What was your impression when you first met Devin? And I do think too that one of the reasons this works, oh, I can't wait to hear this story. One of the
Oh,
reasons this works though
he
is
won't be
because
honest. He won't tell you that I was a complete mess. A complete mess.
Ah, well, but I mean, I think though, one of the things that sets you apart, Devin, is that you really were an honest seeker. You weren't looking to disprove, you were looking for the truth, it seems to me. So, Alan, like, what was your perspective on that meeting? And what do you think made it so effective, essentially the discipleship that took place between you and Devin?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't realize at the time, but yeah, I mean, we talked some. I remember at the event and had an interesting conversation, and I could tell he was open and a seeker. I didn't know where he was coming from, but we talked about getting together again, and then we did, and then I really got to understand more of his background. I think if I remember right, you guys had trouble finding the place. You almost gave up and went home. Is that right, Devin? So I think,
Not that many years ago, I never would have believed in a little guidance, but I met Alan probably about a month in to my crisis of faith, after I had already gone to multiple local churches and really couldn't get any help, and I was trying everything I could think of, and I was kind of at the end of my rope. And I met someone from a Reasonable Faith chapter who didn't do much in the sciences, but he said, by the way, this Friday, so it was like this was on a Wednesday, I believe. This Friday they have this atheist Christian book club out by it's like over by Fort Worth, so it's about an hour drive from me. Where the atheists can get together, and every month they pick a book and then they discuss it. So it's a neat concept and all that. And amazingly enough, this week was going to be the fine tuning argument. So right down the physics alley, and Alan was speaking at it. So say what you will, I mean, talk about perfect timing of exactly what I needed to see, I needed to hear, I needed to talk to someone who was intelligent in the sciences. Um, you know that it wasn't a bunch of backwards rubes that believed in Christianity. No, it's not. It's been great scholars. Some of the most intelligent and greatest minds that have ever lived have been theists and Christians.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how. And Alan is too. Uh, he will
He's
never
humble.
admit how much help he's too humble. He will never admit how much help he was to me. How many
Wow.
times he heard me rant about the multiverse, he put up with that to end. I do want to convey something to the listeners that in your life you'll either be in my seat, having the doubts and maybe not a crisis of faith but lots of doubts, or uh, you'll be in Alan's seat where you encounter someone who's having these doubts and you want to help them. And it's not critical that you understand all the apologetics or the physics or any of the other arguments for faith. It Just having someone there when you are feeling so isolated and lonely, and you feel like a pariah for having these doubts and a heretic, just having somebody there to walk with you through this, um, to be able to go out and even just bend your ear and help you go get a cup of coffee and try to help you get the answers is more help than you can possibly imagine. And
That's so good.
Alan was that and more for me.
I love that.
and it was a pleasure. I mean, we had so many great talks. Soon after this event is when COVID hit, and so we got together quite a bit during the COVID era. So really enjoyed getting out of the house to go talk to Devin, see what's on his mind and all
Yeah.
that. But we both now do help a little bit with talkaboutdoubts.com that
Hmm.
Jonathan McClatchy
Jonathan,
started. We
yeah, yeah.
recommend that. If someone is having doubts, that's a good resource where he will connect you with people that specialize in different areas and so
And we'll
forth.
put that link in the show notes as well, because Jonathan's great, and that's a great place for people to go if they do have doubts. And there's really smart people that are there to interact with questions that doubters might have. Devin, walk us through what moved you from being satisfied scientifically to the gospel, because those are not the same thing.
That's true. They're not, so, and I'm gonna answer an unasked question because this is one I get all the time. Like, what was the magic thing that made you decide that you believed in God? Um, you know, and the the biggest thing is I guess the turning point for me, which leads into your question. The turning point for me was when I realized that atheism can't possibly be true. It's funny that we always hold Christianity or the existence of God up in the light, and it needs to prove that existence and prove its truth. Well, you know what? That's fair. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. But you need to have the same set of standards and the same questions and the same rigor on holding up if the atheism worldview is true. Because I think when you start applying those same metrics or those same milestones or guidance to that, you find that atheism, the idea of atheism collapses very, very quickly. From so many levels. The fact that they can't answer for libertarian free will, that we actually have choice. The fact that there has been at least one supernatural event, namely the Big Bang. It's indisputable. That was outside of nature, hence supernatural. The things like aesthetics. Why does mathematics work like this? There are so many things that when you really look at it, go, well, atheism isn't true, so then what is, right? So then you can start building from there. And what I got to is I started going through all of my questions through science, and those blossomed into lots of others, especially in philosophy. When you start looking at it and you start allowing philosophy and the philosophical arguments to have impact, which early on I thought it was just people doing mind games and you know, playing nonsense with fast and loose to try to prove a point, but it's not. It's really just using logic to solve problems. And when you start considering that, it becomes undeniable that this is a rational idea that should be considered. And then you start going through, like, well, should we believe the disciples, that they weren't just a bunch of naive fishermen, like the folks who follow Jim Jones, right? Folks who follow him. I mean, why wouldn't we think this was just a cult? Well, there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't think this is a cult. And then you start just intellectually engaging with each one of these. And I find that writing down your ideas, because what I found happen, and I think it's pretty common for people that I speak to that go through this, is they'll get on one thing and they start having this list of issues, and it grows and grows and grows, and you're working on number one, and then stuff comes up and more stuff comes up, and then you finally get something sort of resolved, and then you're moving down along and you'll hear something else that makes you go back and doubt number one. Now all the work you did on number one is gone, because now you're doubting that again and you're wondering why, but you don't really remember because there's been such a bombardment of information and data in the days or weeks or months since you've gone through it. And then all of a sudden, like you're like running on ice. You've made zero progress. Well, if you write things down and you can go back and look at your notes and say, is there new information? If there is, great. Well, reevaluate it. Absolutely. More information, reevaluate it. But if there's no new information, what's that?
Writing a book was really key in helping you through all of this, basically.
Well, I wrote the book for me. That I really did. It was, and I even say that in the beginning. It's like, I don't know if anybody will ever read this, because I didn't even, like, I'm writing this to get me through this, to figure out what I believe after I've gone and looked at the real information, the real facts, and considered it all. And then I started from the beginning, like, do we believe the disciples, the apostles, were believable? Do we believe that the manuscripts were timely? Were they really written 300 years later? Was the Council of Nicaea, did they really pick and choose what documents they were going to allow, so that they could? That's where they decided that Christ was going to be God, right? As made popular
Dan
in that,
Brown.
in the Da Vinci Code, right? I mean, all those things that, after you've looked at it, you're like, that's just ridiculous. But when you're going through it and you don't know, you just don't know. Anyway, so just going through it like that, and but a big thing was like I said, writing it down. That really helps.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's sort of the process I went through with my first book, was writing just the journey of my thinking. In fact, I don't call my original book any kind of it's not academic. It's really a theological memoir. And I feel like that's kind of what yours is too. I haven't read yours yet, but it does seem like it's a bit of a theological memoir to go back and say, okay, here's how I was thinking through all of these things, which I think can be incredibly helpful to other people. And so we're definitely going to link your book in the show notes as well. But as we kind of land the plane here, I want to go to each of you. And I would love for you to speak to somebody who might have stumbled upon this video, who might be a skeptic. Maybe they have these questions. I would love you to give some advice to them, and then maybe also give advice to the Christian who's maybe in Alan's position, who is thinking, okay, I have these friends in my life. Maybe they're atheists. Maybe they ascribe to spiritual but not religious, or whatever it might be. And I'm nervous to talk to them because they might say something that I don't know the answer to. And then I'm going to make Jesus look stupid. I'm going to make Christianity look stupid. What can I do to engage better? And so maybe we'll start with you, Alan. What advice would you give to the people who are watching us today?
I think we should all be equipped. I mean, we didn't really get into it, but Devin, for example, didn't get a lot of help from his church. There weren't people there that really had the training. And so I think for at least some of us that are really interested in some of these evidences, learn enough that you can help other people and really study them. And then don't worry if you don't know all the answers. I think a lot of the early help for Devin was me just listening to him and letting him vent, and maybe tossing in a little thing here or there to give him something to think about. Only later, maybe when he was, in a different frame of mind, did I start like, what about this? And here's this
That's good.
evidence.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we're all probably, even once you're trained in apologetics, you're too quick to just, oh, I learned all this stuff, I'm going to go tell somebody. But I think often being a good listener can be really, really important. And for that, you don't really need the training. But I think eventually it's good to obviously to have the training and try to help people find those answers. You can encourage them to read the book. Somebody I was helping in Ohio read Devin's book and was really encouraged by it. He's working through doubts. So that's a resource. Talkaboutdoubts.com itself is a good resource. Devin and I would love to talk to you if you're somebody who has doubts. You're maybe either if you're a non-believer but you're seeking, or maybe you're a believer who's struggling in doubts. We're happy to talk to you. I mean, I met Devin. He wasn't in my church, but once I found somebody that was interested in these kind of topics, I just love talking to him and getting to know him, and we hit it off. So, yeah, we'd love to try to help.
I love that. Devin?
Well, what I'd say is, for someone who is experiencing the doubts, um, believe me, I've been in your shoes, um, and it's hard, but try to marshal this courage to face the questions you have. I will I will guarantee you that you are going to find that there is a wealth of great legitimate information out there, and you're going to find answers that this part I can't guarantee, but man, I really believe it. You are going to be satisfied. You are really going to be satisfied. And it's not wishful thinking. It is, I was coming from a place where I was convinced I was an atheist, and I was asking the hard questions. And believe me, I'm from New York and I am pretty blunt. I was straight out asking stuff. Sometimes I wondered if Alan was going to hang up on me because I sounded like a heretic. I was asking the hard questions straight up. And, if something's true, you can always shine the light of day on it. It'll be fine. Believe me, try it. Try it. It'll be fine. And also, don't walk through it alone. There's no need to. Like, I isolated myself. It's a self-imposed, uh, you know, you become a self-imposed pariah to everyone around you. They don't even know what's going on. I didn't want to talk to my wife because I'm supposed to be the spiritual leader of my family. And I didn't want to look weak to my wife
Mm.
because what's she going to think? How kind of father would I be? I didn't want to tell anybody, any of my friends that, I did go to, like Alan mentioned, went to some of my churches and they didn't really have good information for me. Like, um, but you need somebody to walk down this road with you. And there are plenty of people out there. And if you don't know someone in your life, reach out. Uh, you know, there's tons of ministries. Alan and I will walk with you. If you need the help, we will do that. That is not a problem. We have both been there. And for the people who are solid in their faith and are trying to help other people, like we said before, you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be able to listen and walk with them. Now, like Alan said, there's a lot of people that get some apologetics, and I've seen this a bunch. They they try to pound in whatever piece of apologetics that they felt compelling was for them. And you've got to listen to what the person is struggling with, because it may be very, very different than what you did or learned. Just help them find the answers. And please don't tell people to just have faith. Please don't. I'm begging
Yes.
you. There's really no need for it. You really don't need to have blind faith.
Yeah,
There
that's
there's
right.
there's lifetimes of information and great answers from mathematics and physics and philosophy and biology, and like there's just so much that none of us could ever hope to learn it all. Is there. All we got to do is walk with somebody and go out and get the answers for them, I'm pretty sure you're going to be satisfied as I was. I will say also, I meant to mention to the doubter, um, I know what you're going through is horrible. It really truly is. Um, and it was a good solid 2 years till I even remotely started feeling like myself again. It is the best thing that ever happened to me. If I didn't go through that, I would have had a lukewarm relationship with God, and I never would have gotten to where I am today. I never would have evolved.
Oh,
And that is worth more than anything you have in your life.
wow. Praise God. Wow. And as I'm thinking through your advice, I'll just add mine on here too. I think one of the things that really freed me to be able to feel like I could do a Q&A or even talk with somebody that might have an opposing view. I mentioned to you guys, I'm not really in the science apologetics realm. That's just kind of not my world. It's not the way I think. I much more think more toward biblical scholarship kind of stuff. And so I'm not afraid, though, to talk to somebody who maybe has a science or a physics background, because I always tell people, I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. And yet, for the certain way our brains work, there gets to a point where you're like, okay, there's enough evidence at this point for me to trust that this thing is true. And then at that point, what I can do is I can say, well, look, I don't know the ins and outs of the particular question you're asking, but I can point you to a really good resource. I can point you to a book that, by Stephen Meyer or something like that might help you work out the specifics of the question that you have. And another thing I'll add to that too is that sometimes it's good for us to be asked questions that we haven't necessarily thought through, because it forces us to think them through ourselves. So this happened to me once when I was teaching some students. There was this one particularly science-minded young man who asked me this really tough question that I didn't know the answer to. But what it forced me to do was take that week, do some research, and think it through the way I would think it through, not necessarily the way somebody else might think it through. But what questions does this question bring up in my own mind. When he said this, what was the first thing I thought to clarify or to think through? And then I can come back with my perspective along with other resources. So I think this has been so sweet to listen to both of you guys, your heart. I want to really encourage everybody to go to talkaboutdoubts.com if you have those doubts. I love what they do. You can submit a question and then they'll get back to you with a time for a one-on-one video where somebody will literally look into your eyes and listen to your questions and help you with your doubts. And so this has been such an encouraging episode. Get the book, go to talkaboutdoubts.com, and let's remember that as we pursue Christ, let's keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.